Hello and welcome to Get With The Program Radio Show. I'm your host, Gary Jones. Get With The Program Radio Show is a multicultural, informative, relevant, and entertaining 1 hour weekly show offering you a combination of diverse interviews with questions and comments as we bring awareness to the community. Now listen, if you want to be a guest on the show, all you have to do is log into www.getwiththeprogram.biz, shoot me an email, leave me a message. You never know, you may have a conversation that we would love to talk about. As I said before, we bring awareness to the community. Now listen, today we are going to have a conversation with former Senator Floyd B. Mckissick Jr. Now, former senator, as I mentioned, of North Carolina Utilities Commission currently now. So it is a wonderful pleasure to have Floyd Mckissick here with me today. And we're going to have a wonderful conversation. Floyd, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's my privilege and honor to join you today.
It is a pleasure. Now, I've been following this gentleman for a while. Now, he's been doing this for many, many years, and it's almost like it's been a family type situation. Floyd, tell me about how you got into this whole business of politics.
Well, I mean, I grew up in a family that was very political. My father was very involved in the civil rights movement back in the 60s. He was a leader of CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. Back in the 60s, it was probably the second largest civil rights organization in America. NAACP was always the biggest by several fold, but CORE had about 240 chapters in over 43 states at the time.
And I noticed you had a large, strong connection with Reverend Martin Luther King.
Yes. I mean, Dr. King was somebody who I knew as a child growing up. Was a very good friend of my family, as well as the other leaders of the civil rights movement in that area. People like Stokely Carmichael, of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Whitney Young, who was with the Urban League, James Farmer was also of CORE, and of course Roy Wilkins, the NAACP. So you grew up knowing these people, seeing these people, observing them, listening to them, not only at public meetings and events, but also when you were just at your home, sitting back and talking and discussing politics and strategies and what needed to be done to assemble the resources to tear down the barriers of discrimination at that point in time when segregation was the norm in America.
As we go through history, Floyd,
yes,
the barriers that you know that your father experienced, do you still see some of the same barriers today?
There's still barriers today, absolutely. I mean, the civil rights movement brought about gains. I mean, you had the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that integrated public accommodations like restaurants and hotels and motels. They were no longer segregated. You no longer had separate lunch counters. You no longer had to worry about the restrooms being segregated or the water fountains. But, it was the Voting Rights Act in 1965 that really tore down many barriers in terms of access to the ballot box. I mean, before then, there were poll taxes that had to be paid. You had to go there and take literacy tests in so many states to recite a portion of the Constitution before you could register to vote. So, yeah, I mean, bills like the Voting Rights Act radically changed things. It opened up doors of opportunity. Political gains were made by African Americans. But there were 40 counties in North Carolina that fell under the pre-clearance provisions of the Voting Rights Act, and they were struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2013. And that's when we first got our voter ID laws. That's when we first saw restrictions being imposed on the ability of young people to register to vote. That's when we first started seeing lots of racial gerrymandering occur. So, I mean, do we have to fight those battles today? Yes.
Wow.
If we want to get out there and vote, if we want to elect candidates of choice, if we want to make certain that we have good people that are serving us in Washington, serving us in Raleigh, serving us in the local government as well. I mean, it's important for us to be active, engaged, involved, and understand the importance of a vote. No vote should be taken for granted. I mean, when they talk about voter ID bills here in North Carolina, or constitutional amendments about dealing with voter ID, you're talking about potentially disenfranchising 300,000 people who may not have access to those kind of IDs. We say, well, what's 300,000 people? Should I remind you that when Obama won this state in 2008, he won by 13,000 votes. When he lost the state in 2012, it was by 100,000 votes. When Roy Cooper won this state as our governor in 2016. It was by 10,000 votes. When Biden lost this state, it was by 79, 80,000 votes. So yes, 300,000 votes is a big, big deal. Every vote counts.
It's very interesting. Senator, what do you think the reason today why we are constantly repeating history?
A lot of it has to do with people being afraid of change, being afraid of progress. If you look back to, say, Barack Obama being elected president, we thought it was the pinnacle of success to see an African American ascend to the highest public office in America. But to other people who saw that, they thought of it as being threatening who they were, threatening their existence, threatening a change in America. They see the browning of America with people crossing the borders that are from places like Mexico. So I mean, it's a situation where the people view that change as being threatening. When they view that change as threatening, there's pushback. And when that pushback occurs, you have to go out there and fight it. I think that's what led to Trump getting elected in America. It's what's led to the divisiveness that you saw during his presidency. He came in and divided us. He pitted us against each other. He didn't try to pull us together as commander-in-chief. As I often say, he was divider-in-chief. So I mean, do you see that type of pushback occurring when there's positive change and progress being made? The answer is yes. Do we need to fight it? The answer is absolutely. We have to be diligent. We have to come together. People who are black, people who are white, people who are Asian, people who are Latino. All of us have to come together to fight for a common good, to fight for a greater good, to fight for opportunities and equal access for all, not for people who are going to go out and selectively decide who they represent. And those voices will not be voices that represent the general public. They are narrow voices, and they're voices that are fighting that very change.
Wonderful. Now, do you think that when we had our first black president,
Yes.
President Barack Obama, when we got that president, do you think that at that moment America woke up?
I think they did. I think in many respects, some people woke up in a good way. Some people woke up to understand and embrace cultural diversity, to embrace the fact that an African American man with a name like Barack Obama could ascend to the presidency of this country. Some people embraced it. Other people fought back because they did not like the change that it represented. They did not like the fact that they perhaps felt marginalized, that they felt like they no longer had the same power, they no longer had the same job security, they no longer had what they thought was their rights and their privilege.
Now, when we got President Donald Trump in office, when he became the president, some people often tell me, and even on my show, is that other people began to get relaxed, and I'm gonna use the word more aggressive, when Donald Trump came in office. Do you see it that way?
In my mind, what Donald Trump represented was a symbol. But he was a symbol for those who were fighting progress. He was a symbol, in some instances, for people who were white supremacists. He was a symbol for people who listened to his phrase, "Make America great again." But they were thinking about a greatness at a time when perhaps racial minorities were oppressed. And they didn't have the same opportunities, where they felt they were in charge. So he awoken a set of Americans. He made it popular to stand up and say things that perhaps for decades people got away from saying, or they were afraid to say. He made it the new norm. It was okay, once again, to speak your beliefs in terms of showing prejudice, and in some cases bigotry. And that's the wrong way for us to be. We should be embracing inclusiveness, embracing a world where all people, regardless of their race, regardless of their religion, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity, have the opportunity to reach their fullest human potential and to share with those people, regardless of what economic background they come from, a chance to become a meaningful part of the American mainstream.
Now, I get this question quite a bit, Senator, is that most blacks, African Americans, I get this question a lot. Had that rush on the Capitol, had that been black folk, what do you think would happen?
I think it had been African Americans who were doing it. People would have taken out their guns and they would have shot them. They would not have been able to enter the Capitol that way. I think that's what the reaction would have been. There would not have been a willingness to let them go over obstacles, break down glass doors, come in with weapons in some cases, chanting what they wanted to do to those that were holding public office that day and were in the nation's capital. They would have been viewed as an obvious and present threat. And being the threat that they represented, I think you would have seen widespread bloodshed. I don't think that those in the law enforcement community would have been quite as reserved in using their weapons as they were that day.
Truly, I truly agree with you on it as well.
Just want to remind you that you're listening to Get With The Program radio show. I'm your host, Gary Jones, joining conversation today with Floyd B. Mckissick Jr., Commissioner, former North Carolina Senator, North Carolina Utilities Commission. We're having a wonderful conversation. Floyd Mckissick is sharing some very good knowledge. But listen, what we're going to do, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back after this. Hello, and welcome back to Get With The Program radio show. Again, I'm your host, Gary Jones. We're going to start right where we dropped off.
Now, I'm going to switch gears here. In today's housing market, we've been dealing with housing for years, even when the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was advocating for justice. Where do you see the housing market today for most people, particularly the African-American community?
I think if you're a young African-American family today, it's challenging. It's difficult. If you're renting today, rents have gone up astronomically. It's more difficult to get your foot in the door. It's more difficult to save the money, particularly if you're saddled and you're burdened with student loans, particularly if you're burdened with other expenses from a loved one or relative that may be in a rest home or going through a point and station in life where they need your help and they're dependent upon you. For those families, even trying to rent is difficult. To buy is even more challenging. The thing that I think that most people don't realize is that so often when a family is going out and buying that first home, they have family, they have friends or relatives that will help them get a leg up, that can pass on to them monies that can be used toward that down payment. It amounts to intergenerational wealth. So maybe they inherited it. Maybe there's somebody who has a home equity line of credit that can help give them that money. But they can get that foot in the door so they can become a homeowner, as everybody dreams and aspires to. I think it's more challenging today for young African American families to do so, particularly when you think of the fact that today, and I just use, for example, the fact that women typically earn 79 to 80 cents on a dollar. Well, for black women, they only earn about 65 cents on a dollar. And black men are somewhere in between the two. So, I mean, is there equal access to economic security through jobs and employment, where there's equal pay for equal work? The answer is we're not there yet. Are we better than we were in 1955 and in 1965 and in 1975? The answer is yes. There are more people that are part of that economic mainstream. They're more middle class. But that doesn't mean there aren't many people that are getting left behind. And intergenerationally, they're getting left behind. And particularly after the recession in 2008, where so many people that were homeowners, many of them lost their homes in that period. Trying to make up for that lost territory, make up for that lost gain, make up for that lost opportunity. It's the opportunity cost that's lost. So we have to do something to address it in a meaningful way and in a significant way. And it needs to address all those that are similarly situated, not simply black families alone. There are also families of other races that also lack opportunity. It's just that they perhaps have intergenerational wealth within their families that can rescue them. Black families typically do not.
And that was going to be my next question. A very good point there. How important is generational wealth?
It's incredibly important. If you look at what happens with generational wealth, it means that when you pass away, if it's planned, and it should always be planned, you should think about what's going to happen and not just wait one day and your family's left sitting there not knowing what to do after you pass, you don't have a will or whatever. You should be planning on passing on whatever you can, whether that's through a life insurance policy, whether it is through taking the home that you own and deciding how it should be best addressed, whether you want to help pass on to that next generation something that will give them a leg up, we should all think about that. We should all strategize about that. We shouldn't just think that I worked hard to get it, it's mine, and if somebody else wants it, they got to work hard too. We got to work on giving people, that next generation, our children, our grandchildren, our friends, our legacy, a leg up so they don't have to fight quite so hard, and it's an easier, more level playing field to compete upon. That's a duty that we all have. That's a level of consciousness that should be ever present in our minds. It's what we should focus upon so that we open up those doors of opportunities, not just in terms of intergenerational wealth, but in terms of access to jobs, access to opportunities that can help people improve their qualities of life, provide for their families, but more importantly, be a part of what that American dream is all about.
Sure. Another gear shift here. Once again, you're joining conversation today with Gary Jones, host and producer of Get With The Program Radio Talk Show, and the conversation today with former Senator Floyd Mckissick. Floyd, I'm going to shift gears here on my next question here. How important is it for women's rights and going through the situation currently now that we have the abortion switch that's going on? Tell me about that.
I mean, women's rights are exceedingly important. And I'd like to recognize that women have made gains that are monumental over the last 50 years. If we think about where women have come from women's suffrage, I mean, when I say women's suffrage, people forget that it wasn't until the 1920s or so where women actually had the right to vote. I mean, so I mean, women have made astronomical gains and are continuing to break glass ceilings in America. But I think we just have to look at the recent decision of the United States Supreme Court where they basically overturned Roe v. Wade. And in overturning Roe v. Wade, they overturned the right of a woman to make decisions about her own body, what she has a right to do. I don't care how you feel personally about abortions, whether you believe in them or whether you're opposed to them. I think the key thing is that it is a right that a woman uniquely should be entitled to make. It's her body. And it should be constitutionally protected. And it was protected under the rights of privacy. If there is, in fact, a right to privacy to make that important determination, that decision on your own without interference from others, that should be one that you'll be able to make. And it was a tragic day when the United States Supreme Court overturned it. I mean, they're now hinting that they might overturn marriage equality. And then it's been talked about, well, even the Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Act was based upon the Commerce Clause and goods being involved in commerce. Well, if you really think states should have the right to decide and make their own laws dealing with abortion, if you really think that states should have the right to make their own laws dealing with marriage equality, how far are we away from saying states should make their own laws in terms of discrimination and anti-discrimination?
Not far.
Not that far away. We can't take for granted the rights that we've had over the last 50 and 60 years. We need to be ever present and very mindful of the fact that that new United States Supreme Court, as presently constituted with a majority of conservative judges, can do a lot to turn the hands are tied backward. And those three appointees that President Trump made are making all the difference in the world. If we had just had about 80,000 people turn out and vote in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, we wouldn't have had him elected as president with less than the popular vote. We would have had Hillary Clinton. And if she had filled those three vacancies in the Supreme Court, I would not be concerned about the fate and direction that court is taking us today.
Wow. One last question here, Senator. In reference to the wages, currently, that's been such a huge conversation about Americans, and particularly state level, federal level. A lot of complaints is it's not enough money with the cost of living going up. What is your take on the wage?
I think the minimum wage laws in this country should have been updated years ago, decades ago. I mean, people can't live on a minimum wage that is required, federally, federal minimum wage. So, I mean, should we be talking about a livable wage? A livable wage, yes, but the minimum wage and the what I call would be the livable wage are vastly different. I mean, livable wage might be minimally $15 an hour, $16 an hour. Can you live on $7.25 an hour or so? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I mean, you know, I was sitting there looking at some data recently. They said, well, you know, people need to be able to make at least 200% of the federal poverty level to be able to qualify for certain programs. But when you actually went out there and looked at what it meant in terms of 200%, it was about, for a family of four, it's $55,000. And that's 200%. If it was 100%, we're talking about half of that. I don't know how a family of four lives on $26,000, $27,000 a day in America, with the price of living and cost of living to be what it is.
It's constantly going up.
It's insane. It's literally impossible to think about the challenges of families doing it today, particularly when you don't have families living on the farm and growing the food and growing their vegetables. You're talking about driving cars, and a gallon of gas today, on a good day you might get it for $3.50, and on a bad day it may be $5. So, you know, it's cyclical.
So it goes back to the most important thing that we talked about in this conversation, the importance of the vote. We have to get out and vote. Senator, thank you so much for being here today. Once again, joining the conversation today with Senator Floyd Mckissick. Wonderful guy. He needs no introduction, but I gave him an introduction, but he's overwhelming with words, and the history of politics come from your dad.
Well, thank you so much. My privilege and honor to be with you today, and I can only say to you, continue these programs. You educate a lot of people. You bring a lot of people up to date, and you're enlightening them about issues and topics that they need to be aware of, and I commend you for serving as that type of important educational resource.
Thank you so much, Senator. Once again, thank you for joining me today. Get with the program. I'm your host, Gary Jones, and until next time. Also, we're going to have the Senator back on the show very, very soon, so keep a lookout for that. Once again, thank you for joining today. As I always say, stay positive, keep your head up, and remember to
get with the program. What you talking about? The program. The program. Get with the program. Everybody clap to this. Say what? Get with the program.
It starts now.